1 million lives lost, 30 million infected. Where are we in this crucial fight? Could a COVID-19 vaccine start a new Cold War? Presenting Looking Forward, Avoiding a Vaccine Cold War, with your host, Interim CEO, Andy Carr.
Be one of the most important events hosted by the George and Barbara Bush Foundation. The 2019 coronavirus has presented our world with one of its gravest threats yet in the 21st century. And as with any global threat, it will require multilateral action and bold leadership in order for us to see through the latest moment of testing. The alternative in this case could lead to a new Cold War, with vaccines as the flashpoint. That's where the Bush's dear friend, Dr. Marty Murphy, comes in. Dr. Murphy has helped us reach out to the top researchers, scientists, and strategists on the planet to help us understand where we are today in this critical fight. And they can tell us what lies ahead. Marty, we could not be more grateful to you for participating in what we're doing and partnering with your friends and who are among the most respected authorities that you've helped bring together. So Marty, take it away.
Well, thank you for your leadership, Andy. I know the Bushes would be proud of what we are doing here today. Maybe what we should do now is, because of the, really the respect that we have for the Bushes, that's how we're being convened today. In great measure, I believe that's why world-renowned experts have agreed to join us, Andy. It is also because George Bush helped end the last Cold War by working closely and collaboratively with allies. It is in that spirit of collaboration that we need multilateral action again today. After leaving the White House, the convening power of George and Barbara Bush also helped change the trajectory of another war, the war on cancer. Their creation of the CEO Roundtable on Cancer in the United States and in China is a global source of good to this very day. It's the sterling names and reputations of George and Barbara Bush that convenes us today, and as we discuss positive solutions to this great problem, the pandemic. Andy?
Talking about where we are in this pandemic and how we get out of it. Explain our first set of top minds and why their opinion matters. Marty?
Thanks, Andy. Let me give a little bit of background first. The coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, that has caused COVID-19 pandemic will only be staunched with a coordinated worldwide effort. We've heard over and over, rightfully so, no one of us is safe until all of us are safe. The world is at war with this virus, and the only way to end this war is to become immune to the virus through global vaccination. In the last Cold War, the world's superpowers controlled nuclear warheads atop intercontinental ballistic missiles. These powers then wielded influence on the rest of the less powerful world. We are now faced with superpowers that may control life-sparing vaccines. Our charge and challenge today is to help avert countries from devolving into a vaccine Cold War. To help lead the way, our world is blessed with armies that already are dedicated to global vaccination, and we are honored to have the leaders of 3 of these armies with us. Headquartered in London, the Wellcome Trust is one of the world's most powerful foundations that supports biomedical research. During its 84-year history of achievements, the Human Genome Project, in collaboration with the United States National Institutes of Health, ranks high, rivaled only by its prowess in immunology and virology. The World Health Organization, WHO, was founded in 1948 at the end of the Second World War as a specialized agency of the United Nations responsible for international public health. WHO has played a leading role in the world's first eradication of a virus, the one that caused smallpox. And the WHO has drawn very near to the eradication of polio. 4 years ago, Wellcome Trust and the WHO were joined by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to create our third army that they named the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, CEPI. It is funded by many countries and civil society to foster and speed independent vaccine development. Since the emergence of COVID-19, CEPI has been fully deployed to accelerate vaccine development and to enable equitable access of safe and effective vaccines around the world. To make a safer world, Wellcome Trust, WHO, and CEPI are dedicated to making equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines that will end the acute phase of the pandemic by the end of 2021. Andy, would you like me now to introduce our faculty?
No, thank you very much. You've got such a great team here. We're very fortunate to have these top minds with us to make sense of this tremendous challenge. So yes, please do introduce them and let's get going.
Thanks, Andy. It's a distinct privilege to introduce these three world-class physician scientists who are leading a global campaign to staunch this pandemic. In the next 40 minutes, we will benefit from the expertise and wisdom of our three faculty members. Sir Jeremy Farrar has been with Wellcome Trust for more than 20 years, the last 5 of which as its esteemed director. He has been among the world's leaders in fighting SARS, Ebola, H1N1, among other deadly pathogens. Named by Fortune among the greatest leaders in 2015, Jeremy is a fellow of the revered Royal Society. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan is the WHO's chief scientist and one of its key generals in the worldwide attack on coronavirus. Her pioneering studies and her successful public health interventions with tuberculosis and HIV equipped her for her leading position at the WHO. And Dr. Richard Hatchett, founding Chief Executive Officer of CEPI, earned his appointment by years of directing research at the U.S. Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, BARDA, where he led the development of vaccines for emerging viruses, including MERS, Ebola, and Zika. He previously served in the White House under President George W. Bush and then President Barack Obama. Jeremy will lead off with your status of the conquest to control the pandemic and what you see as evidence-based progress, and then, very importantly, what causes you concern. We'll ask then Soumya to provide your global perspective from the parapet of the WHO with an emphasis on solidarity as a deterrent to a vaccine Cold War. And then, Richard, we're going to be anxious to learn the progress that CEPI has and is making and how you are supporting the equitable and fair distribution of vaccines around the world. Sir Jeremy, please lead us off. Welcome from all of our faculty.
Marty, thanks very much. It's a huge honor to join you and the George and Barbara Bush Foundation, and it could not have come at a more important time. It's also a privilege to join a panel alongside Soumya and Richard. You'll read many things in the newspaper about WHO and about CEPI, but I'd say from a personal level, to join a panel with two extraordinary leaders who are not only working essentially 24 hours a day, putting their own reputations on the line, but actually making a difference is an enormous privilege. And both WHO and CEPI represented here are absolutely leading the world, and we should all be very grateful for that. I'm going to start with where I think we are and I'm going to end on what I think is an optimistic note. But first, the reality. And I still think, frankly, that the world is underestimating where we stand. This is a human endemic infection now. It's not going away. It will reverberate around the world for many, many years to come. It will damage health, of course, but I'd like to phrase this in 4 overlapping circles. The direct impact on health is tragic, as we've seen in every country in the world. There's the indirect consequences of COVID on all of the other health issues: vaccination, cancer care, care of the elderly, diabetics, has suffered during this. The third one is its discombobulated economies, trade, education, trust in government. And then the fourth is the impact on geopolitics, which of course this foundation has been so important over many years in arguing for multilateralism. We run the risk of COVID turning us into another polarized Cold War and epidemics, which we must avoid, and which I'd implore the George and Barbara Bush Foundation to push forward for. So I think we mustn't underestimate where we are or the challenges of getting out of this. But there is only one way out of this, and that is through the appliance of science, the equitable access to the benefits of that science, and critically towards vaccination. The $12 trillion that we're losing at the moment in lost economies will only be replaced. Our children will only go back to school when it's safe for them to do so and they can trust the environment in which they're in. And we can only bring about that by using science to push forward the agenda, make sure that nobody is left behind, and that make sure that we have the vaccines both researched, developed, manufactured, and distributed around the world. There is a way to go to get there, but we can get there, but we can only get there if we come together as a world, we share what we're doing, we make sure what we're doing is distributed equitably all around the world. This is a moment of critical political leadership, a moment where political leadership will reverberate for years to come, and we will talk about in 100 years' time that that leadership was there. And at the moment, we're lacking that global leadership, and we desperately need it. Marty, over to you. I hope the George and Barbara Bush Foundation can help make the case for that time of the moment in history when global leadership is just so important.
No one could have set the stage better than you have, Jeremy, nor I outlined the ways out of this pandemic. And let's then turn to Sumia. Please, last week, the Director General of WHO, Dr. Tedros, was asked a question. Sumia, you and I were there, you personally, me virtually. And the question was posed, what is the one thing, Dr. Tedros, that causes you concern, that may keep you awake at night? And without hesitation, he said what? One word: solidarity. Can you lead us into a discussion of that and why it's so important?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marty. And thanks to the George and Barbara Bush Foundation for engaging in this really thought-provoking discussion. And I think Jeremy has very eloquently explained, where we are today, what the risks are, how we can still pull together as one world going forward, or indeed, we can fall apart. And then it's going to be it's going to take us probably decades to recover, if at all. Just yesterday, the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board presented their report, and Jeremy is one of the distinguished members of that board. It's called A World in Disorder. And essentially, at the same time last year, they presented a report which actually warned the world about such a thing happening, the possibility of a pandemic and the fact that the world is not prepared. Unfortunately, this happened all too soon. And within a few months of them actually presenting that report, which said the world was ill-prepared, we were in the midst of a massive pandemic with this new virus, which has many properties which make it quite difficult to contain and to control. So now we have only one way forward, and that is, as you mentioned, the word solidarity is the only way out of this situation, because the virus doesn't respect borders. It doesn't respect nationalities or politics or gender or age or anything. It looks for vulnerabilities and it exploits them. And where it sees division, where it sees discord, that's where the virus is going to spread and has been spreading most effectively. On the positive side, what I would say is that I've seen tremendous global cooperation, collaboration, and the willingness to work together among scientists, among doctors, among healthcare workers, researchers, including the private sector and the public sector, coming together to develop the tools that are going to help us end this pandemic, whether it's new diagnostics, better drugs and treatments, and of course, the vaccines that eventually are the best hope for us to put an end at least to the acute phase of the pandemic. And that's where WHO, I think, was quite instrumental in bringing together through a framework that we already had developed after Ebola in 2016, called the R&D Blueprint, which is a framework for how to do research on novel pathogens. And so very quickly in February, we convened about 400 scientists and came up with a research roadmap that already laid out what the knowledge gaps were. At that point, this is a new virus, we knew very little about it, and what the top priorities were. We've come a long way since then. In the past, we've only been, well, it seems like an eternity, but it's been 9 months. And we've learned a tremendous lot about it. There's been open sharing of knowledge, data. All journals have have basically removed paywalls so that knowledge is freely available. And I think that's our hope for the future. And that is what people would like to see. Now, if we had the same thing happening at the political level, then of course it would be, I think, a win-win for all. But I do think that on the science side, including the establishment of the ACT Accelerator, there's been a tremendous coming together and a willingness to share and to work together and to bring our complementary strengths in order to achieve the goal much faster than if we had all continued to work in our silos. Back to you, Marty.
Thank you, Soumya. Could you just describe for a global audience the ACT Accelerator, and then that would be a wonderful segue to you, Richard.
Sure. So the ACT Accelerator was launched on the 24th of April by a group of heads of state, including the President of the European Commission, Melinda Gates, Director General Dr. Tedros, President Macron, a host of other world leaders. Jeremy was at that launch as well, because the Wellcome Trust has been strongly behind this global initiative from the beginning, as has been the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the accelerator has two big goals. One is to accelerate the development of these new tools that we just talked about, the diagnostics, the drugs, and the vaccines, but also to ensure equitable access. Because all too often in the past, the rich countries and those who've been able to afford for these technologies get them decades ahead of people living in poor countries or poor people living in high-income countries. So the quest is not only to get those new tools developed, but to ensure that they actually get to people who need them, regardless of where they live. And therefore, I think this is where, again, it's the concept of solidarity that went into the ACT Accelerator. There's a lot of science and technology going on behind the scenes, but it's also a question of bringing countries together. And I'm sure Richard is going to talk about COVAX, the vaccines pillar of the accelerator. We've achieved a lot. It's only been 4 months, but already there have been several successes. And the next few months are really going to be very, very critical if this is to succeed.
Thank you, Soumya. That was a perfect segue for you, Richard. And I was just thinking about, your tremendous background as one of the leaders of BARDA, where everything was at scale. It was all huge. Little did you know that was prelude to this orchestration, which is now not just huge, it's global. Take it away, Richard.
Thank you, Marty, and thank you, Mr. Card. And I want to also thank the George and Barbara Bush Foundation, of course, for bringing us together. It is an honor, as Jeremy and Sumya have said, to participate this evening. Let me start by talking a little bit about the vaccine situation, where we are with vaccines, and then I will follow up on Sumya's segue into a discussion of COVAX, which is a global initiative to deliver vaccines to all countries at the same time, in the interest of global equity, but also in the interest of ending the pandemic as quickly as possible. CEPI is the baby organization of the three organizations represented here. We are new. We're only about 3.5 years old at this point. We were started in January of 2017 with a mission to develop vaccines against emerging infectious diseases and to help the world be prepared for new emerging diseases like COVID-19. When COVID-19 emerged in late December, CEPI went on high alert, and we very rapidly moved to develop vaccine candidates. And within a few weeks in early January, we realized that we would have to actually develop those candidates, not just to have them in the freezer, but to take them into clinical trials and to scale them up because of the threat that we were facing. It was very apparent by January 24th, 25th, that we were likely facing an incipient pandemic. Over the last 9 months, CEPI as an organization has provided funding for 9 vaccine candidates. 8 of those are now in human clinical trials. 2 are in the phase 3, the last stage of testing. And we have also focused our efforts, especially over the last 5 or 6 months, on the problem of access. Ending the pandemic will require 2 things. It requires the fruits of science in terms of developing vaccines and other medical countermeasures, but it will also require global collaboration. You cannot end the pandemic in a single country. You have to provide the tools to end the pandemic to all countries. You need to do that simultaneously if you don't want to extend the pandemic and to lead to greater loss of life, greater economic devastation. It is really, Jeremy has outlined some of the impact of the pandemic. The entire world is experiencing those effects, and we can envision a pandemic lasting several years, or we can work together and try to bring it to at least the acute phase to an end by the end of next year. What CEPI has done with our partners at WHO, with Wellcome Trust, with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with Gavi, and with other partners, is to think about how we can coordinate a global response. And CEPI's main contribution to that has been with Gavi and WHO to establish COVAX, the COVID-19 Vaccines Access Facility. And this is an effort to bring countries together to share the risk of developing vaccines, and also to share the benefits of pooling their procurements so that they can buy at scale, and so those vaccines can then be allocated through a globally fair allocation system. This is not only the right thing to do from a moral perspective, but it is also the right thing to do from an efficiency perspective, because it is only by sharing what will be a scarce resource for at least the next 18 months to 2 years, and making sure that we get the vaccine to those who need it most, to healthcare workers and to those at the greatest risk of suffering the severe illness or death from the virus, that we will be able to take the edge off of the pandemic and make it something that human societies can live with, and thus something that they can begin to restore their normal activity. Let me pause there. I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about COVAX. Actually, before I pause, one last comment about COVAX. We are at a pivotal moment in the development of COVAX. Midnight Friday is the deadline for countries worldwide to make formal commitments to COVAX. So far, we have more than 170 countries that have expressed their intent to commit. We will find out if they do commit at the end of this week. If they do, that will represent more than 70% of the world's population, about 5.6 billion people living in countries that will have elected to join together in a global multilateral effort to defeat the pandemic.
Jeremy, would you opine on something that I heard often from you early on, and that was enlightened self-interest? And in a way, that's what, Sumia and Richard have also spoken, but I'd hope that you would re-emphasize that. And then, Richard, if you don't mind, if I act as the exchequer and ask you at some point, tell us how much money has been thus far contributed philanthropically from nations and foundations and high net worth individuals that have enabled you to de-risk not the vaccine, but the production of it. So Jeremy, first you and then Richard.
Yeah, this is, in my view, this is the exemplar of enlightened self-interest. This is an infection which is reverberating around the world. There is no exit for any country, rich or poor, until all other countries are safe from this pandemic. As somebody said recently, it would be much better to vaccinate some people in all countries than all people in one country. That's both a public health message, but also a financial, an economic, an educational. It affects everything in society. And this is the coming together, unusual actually, but the coming together of true public health and enlightened self-interest to get your country back on its economic feet again, get your children back into school, your students back into universities, and people back into the workplace. It is the only way out. And actually, Marty, if just 1 minute more, I think this actually also defines what we want from the 21st century. If you look at all of the great challenges we're going to face in this century, many of them have these same characteristics. They don't represent borders, epidemics, climate change, drug-resistant infections, whatever we talk about, they will all need this approach. And whilst our focus is on COVID and COVAX and the ACT Accelerator, etc., actually, this will define the sort of way we want the world to be in the 21st century and will reverberate through many other issues for many years to come.
Jeremy, and that's why the George and Barbara Bush Foundation, known for their collaborative approach, they're looking forward, as was the title of his first book, are so proud to pledge their collaboration and intent with Wellcome Trust, with the WHO, and with CEPI, and yes, with Gavi as well, and hopefully a future message. So thank you for really giving us that vision, but a vision also that requires funding to power it. Richard, how have you done it and how much have you raised? But then also I'd ask the three faculty to make sure that we have your take-home message, and there are multiple here, that you want each of the viewers as members of your class to take away with, not only in their own hearts, but put it on their lips so that they can tell it. Richard, how much does it cost? How have you raised it? And how much do you yet need?
Well, it costs a lot. Vaccine development inherently is an expensive undertaking. It's high risk. And because of the way we want to do this, we want to move as fast as we possibly can without taking undue risks, I should add, with respect to safety. But we want to move as fast as we can, and we want to be assured of success. So we have to invest in multiple candidates because we don't know in advance which ones are going to succeed. When we set out in January, we tried to estimate what the cost for research and development would be to produce a portfolio of candidates that produced a high likelihood that 3 or 4 of those candidates would be successful and that we would be able to produce them at scale. We estimated that we would need at least $2 billion in the first 12 to 18 months to support the research and development. And that does not include the manufacturing, and it does not include the scaling up or scaling out of the manufacturing. We've estimated those costs probably in the range of another $5 billion or so. And the cost to then procure vaccine and to distribute that vaccine globally takes it up into the tens of billions, probably north of $20 billion for that undertaking. we were very fortunate. We had a number of our CEPI investors, a number of other countries that had not previously invested in CEPI, a number of private individuals, a number of private sector companies, and certainly our foundation supporters and Wellcome and the Gates Foundation step up. And we very rapidly were able, with just literally within just a couple of months, able to raise about $1.4 billion. And subsequently, our partners at Gavi have raised about $1 billion of what they will need to begin to procure vaccine. But I think you can do the math, Marty, and $2.5 billion between us does not add up to $20 billion. We have huge requirements, and that's part of the COVAX facility that I was describing earlier. Countries will pay for the vaccine that is delivered to them if they are high-income countries or upper-middle-income countries. But we also need to raise a tremendous amount of money to support vaccine procurement and delivery for the 92 countries that are not in a position to buy their own vaccine. If I had to say one thing to the audience, it would be, please encourage your political leaders to contribute to this global effort. As Jeremy was saying, it is enlightened self-interest. Contributing to this effort will help end the pandemic. It will help end it sooner. $20 billion is an enormous sum of money until you compare it with the damage to the global economy that is being done every single month. The IMF has recently released an estimate of that damage, and it amounts to about $17 billion a day. And that's what we should bear in mind as we think about bringing the resources together to support this effort.
So it brings also to emphasize the 170 countries that have shown an interest but have not yet anteed up, so that whatever we can do now to encourage our appropriate representatives to commit to COVAX, to absolutely make this a priority, will ensure, as all three of you have said, that fair and equitable, but also rapid development and distribution of vaccine is possible. Sumia, you know, the World Health Organization has that name because it truly has the health of all the world as your responsibility. Tell us how we can help. Tell us, all of us, how WHO can help. We know what you're doing, but how can we help you do it?
Thank you, Marty. I think I just want to start off with what Richard was saying at the end. It's estimated that the entire cost for ACT, the accelerator, which is about $35 billion, is equal to just less than 2 days worth of economic damage that's happening currently because of the disruptions across the world. And so while it is a moral and an ethical argument, you know, that there should be equity and equality when we talk about people, because people are the same all around the world, we shouldn't be distinguishing between them. But there's also this economic argument for, you know, the ministers of finance and the heads of state who are thinking about protecting their own people. I think it's very natural for a political leader to want to first protect their own populations. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think we have to remember in this particular case, since we are faced with this pandemic, that that's not going to bring that country back to normal, whatever that country may be. And so if we go in that direction, where a few countries are able to vaccinate their populations and protect them, it's not going to help the world recover. It's not going to help their own economies. So I think there is a strong economic case in addition to the moral and ethical imperative. We're looking with increasing concern at the impact that this is having on health of people. We are seeing, you know, very grim estimates of the impacts that COVID is having on people's lives, apart from the direct impact that it's having, infecting people and the mortality, and also some of the long-term effects that this virus seems to have, even in people who don't get very sick. They seem to have a lot of symptoms later, and we're still learning more about these long-term consequences. But other than that, because it's disrupted lives, it's people are out of work, it's disrupted livelihoods, it's increased hunger, it's going to increase poverty. We have 1.6 billion children that have been out of school, and only a small proportion of them have had access to online education. They've been missing their meals at school. There are also terrifying projections of increase in sexual domestic violence against women and children, as well as trafficking, all the results of the increasing poverty that we're going to see. So the sooner we bring an end to the acute phase of this pandemic, the sooner that economies can open up, that people can start going back to work and get back to a semblance of normality, the better it is for everyone. And also the less it's going to cost to rebuild in the long term. So again, I think this is a question of enlightened self-interest that Jeremy often talks about, that even for the high-income economies, it is much better to help bring everyone back at the same time than it is, to let it linger on and drag on. And this virus is not going anywhere. It's just going to keep infecting people who are still susceptible. Our role is to bring member states together to discuss. As you know, WHO is governed by 194 member states, each one of whom have an equal voice and an equal say in the running. The international health regulations that were set up that were last modified in 2005 actually lay out, they were developed by the member states, and they are the rules that are meant to be followed, especially when it relates to these infectious disease outbreaks. As you know, we're going to have a review of those international health regulations, as well as a very high-level review of the pandemic response. How did the world actually perform? How did each of us actually perform? I'm sure that there'll be many, many lessons to be learned. There always are lessons to be learned so that we can do better. But I think for now, the message to people is that we have to remember our humanity. We have to remember that we're one. The viruses and bacteria don't know the differences between us. And so if we're fighting an enemy, which is a virus, then our only chance really is to unite and put our best foot forward together.
Beautiful. I'm reminded of, I believe it's the Swiss motto, one for all and all for one. There has been a theme throughout these last 45 minutes of just that, of solidarity, of hopefulness, but also of potential continuation of a very dark future. It is indeed up to all of us. It is a team that's going to cure not just the disease, but cure other things that ail us as you described them, Jeremy. The 41st president, George H.W. Bush, was known for many things, but one of which was truly the leader of a team, the assemblage of a team, the inspiration of a team. He had three aspects that he shared with me. He said, in crucial things, unity. In important things, diversity. And in all things, generosity. Unity, diversity, and generosity. It's typified, actually, this hour, that we have had an opportunity to say we must come together in unity, stronger now than ever before. We must have diversity, and look at the three faculty members that bring such different disciplines, but in a complementary form. And then there must be generosity of spirit for the world. Sumia, Jeremy, Richard, in the pandemic pantheon, will hang your portraits, lighted by the votive candles, enkindled with gratitude. For you have held aloft the torch of enlightenment that is helping to lead us out, this troubled world out of an abyss. We salute you, we thank you, and we ask God to bless you. Andy, it's over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Marty. You and your panelists certainly had an enlightening conversation for us. We now know a lot more. I will also admit that it was a pretty sobering presentation as well. This is very serious and we've got to rally. So thank you, Marty, for doing that. You know, as this program came together, we knew that we were fortunate to have a phenomenal partner in the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University, because they've had a long-standing expertise and focus on pandemics, and it had already earned them respect around the globe for their scholarship and thought leadership. And then less than 2 months ago, the US government gave Texas A&M University itself a $250 million contract to mass produce vaccines once the green light is given. To talk about this critical piece of the pandemic recovery, we are honored and pleased to have Dr. Glenn Lane, a most distinguished fellow at the Bush School, and Vice Chancellor Greg Hartman at Texas A&M to discuss the highly select role Texas A&M has been asked to play. So Glenn, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Andy. So Texas A&M University, the Bush School, the Scowcroft Institute at the Bush School have been preparing for this inevitable day for over a decade, actually. Our yearly pandemic conferences, our publications in this area, along with the physical facilities that have been constructed here on campus for vaccine development and production, have all been in preparation to support the path forward in dealing with pandemic diseases like COVID-19, but also the many other pandemic diseases which will visit us in the future. And I can guarantee they will be on their way. One of our facilities is our National Center for Therapeutic Manufacturing, operated in conjunction with Fujifilm Dyson and built with federal support from BARDA, the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. And I have to say a thank you here to Dr. Hatchett, who we just heard from, who was integral to us having this facility here on campus. And perhaps I could, since Greg is on the line with us, maybe I could turn this over to Greg for some comments as he represents our Health Science Center.
Thank you, Dr. Lane. It's an honor to be here with you. And again, we have to also give you a lot of credit for getting this asset, this resource available here at Texas A&M University. You had a big role to play in here. And I have to also say, after that opening session, sort of sobering and serious session, it sort of makes me nervous, as well as kind of got the adrenaline flowing here, because the role that we can play here at A&M to be a part of that solution. So it was really wonderful to hear those international experts talk about this. So yeah, Texas A&M, particularly our Center for Innovative Advanced Design Manufacturing, has this contract from BARDA, which is the Biomedical Advanced Research Development Authority, for about $265 million to produce the antigens for the vaccine. Ultimately, we could produce as much as 500 million of the vaccine, of the core components of the vaccine here in the Bryan-College Station area. That facility, they're doing day and night construction, getting it ready for preparation for this. And our goal is to be prepared to begin to actually start manufacturing the antigen part of the vaccines by probably January 1st or so. I think we'll be ready, up and running, able to do it by then, and everything's on track now to be able to do this. So from a pure just logistical point of view, getting things done, we're in good shape. And as you mentioned, this is something that A&M, CATM, which is that center, has been looking to do for a long time.
Excellent. So now, in conjunction with Novavax, funded by Operation Warp Speed, actually, we at A&M will produce COVID-19 vaccines. A couple of words about the production of such. even though we have this physical facility, which can in fact produce large quantities of the vaccine, the numbers are staggering. So if you look at the population of just our country, we're looking at 300 million plus. And if you're looking, much more broadly, we're talking about numbers in the billions. And anyone who might have a business can think to themselves, if somewhere along the line, your company was asked to produce an extra 100 billion or 100 million, whatever widgets you were producing, you can imagine just the supply chain that's involved in exercising such an operation will be significant. Now, interestingly, here at Texas A&M, we also have a great deal of expertise in supply chain. And those things that come to play are like, you may have seen in the news that various vaccines require different transportation technologies. Some require ultra cold environments. Others can be placed in your refrigerator. And of course, when distribution time comes, and I must add that all the states have been put on alert to be ready for distribution as soon as the Food and Drug Administration approves the vaccine, that the appropriate vaccines will be sent to the appropriate locations. Places like health science centers where we have the minus 80 freezers will get those vaccines. Other places will get those that can be maintained in a regular refrigeration. So there are issues associated with supplies and distribution, but there are experts in these areas that are already taking them to task so that on day one, we'll be ready to implement not only manufacture, but distribution. And I'll just add that you'll notice that each of the facilities that will be producing vaccine have been asked to produce more vaccine than is necessary for the residents in the United States. So we're producing vaccine at a much higher level so that the rest of the world can benefit from our efforts.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Lane too, just to talk about the logistics, because you're right, the logistics are amazing. Whether you're talking about transportation, transmission, whatever it's going to be, just the process of tracking vaccines from the manufacturer through the process to the final patient. If there's a bad batch, God forbid, you want to make sure you can track that kind of stuff down. The logistics of this are just incredible. One of the most amazing factoids I've heard is that just to have enough glass for the glass vials is a real issue. That about the type of glass used for these vials is really about 10% of the glass that we manufacture right now. And so we really, we have to really ramp up glass manufacturing. I believe the Corning Ware Corporation has been given something like a $220 million contract to begin just producing the glass for the vials for what we're producing in the United States. So the complications here are enormous. And then the other layer of complication, as you all know, Dr. Lane, too, is, there could be may be more than one good vaccine that we'll have out of this. And they may come online at different times too. So it's not going to be that there's one vaccine. I guess there could be, but there's no guarantee there's going to be one vaccine that solves everything. It's probably going to be a different set of vaccines, some of which come available at different times. The science may grow over time, and there may be vaccines that require booster shots. And so the complexity you're talking about, you can begin to double that, start to think about the real process here of getting the right vaccine to people so that we actually do begin to tamp down the virus. So the complexities are just multi-leveled, and it's really a fascinating process to do. And we are lucky here at A&M not only to be helping to produce the part of the vaccine, we've got some folks in College of Engineering and our School of Pharmacy and other folks who are looking at this engineering, thinking about logistics. We have several of our scientists in the School of Pharmacy, College of Pharmacy, that are actually working on some of these storage issues and working on some of the quality control issues that you have when you're moving this amount of vaccine around.
Yes, excellent. So I might also point out that the facility that's will be manufacturing the vaccine here on campus at Texas A&M University has a tremendous training component built into it. And the long-term considerations are that once we are no longer in the picture for production of these vaccines, that there'll be a new generation of people trained not only in manufacturing of the vaccines, but also the logistics issue of distribution. I'll also bring up that we have another new facility on campus called our Global Health Research Complex, which has been designed to specifically work on vaccine development of diseases that may manifest themselves in the future. I think it's an ongoing process, and if we're looking to the future, we will get a handle on COVID-19, but we want to make sure when the next pandemic comes along, and understanding that there are many areas in the world that are dealing with diseases worse than COVID-19. And should that day come to pass, that we will have the facilities here on campus to not only investigate and develop a vaccine, but also to bring that vaccine to fruition and distribution.
Yeah, that's right, Dr. Lane. You know, I was on a call this morning, as a matter of fact, working with the folks at CATM and our Institute of Bioscience Technology, which is an A&M institute that's located in the Texas Medical Center, actually talking about some ways to build opportunities for both our researchers, our academics, and our students to work together on this. Because you're exactly right. There's the production of this vaccine, and again, as I mentioned, there could be, multiple production of this vaccine, possibly other vaccines. Our facility could possibly be involved in the production of the manufacture of more than just this first vaccine, could actually be involved in secondary vaccine as well too. And then there's a whole thinking going on that I've read some about, you probably know better than I do even, of, is there the possibility of beginning to develop a base coronavirus kind of vaccine, technology that we could have in anticipation of what may be coming next. If you look at the last few years between SARS and H1N1 and the rest of these, we've been getting these every 8 to 10 years, some version of this. And I know there's some academics and researchers starting to say, could we be better prepared to start a vaccine production, not from ground zero like we've had to do with COVID-19, but actually be a little better prepared to respond more quickly. And we've got folks working on that, both throughout our colleges as well as from the manufacturing perspective, is how do you create a facility that can be that nimble and flexible to do that kind of manufacturing on different platforms based on what comes next.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much, both Glenn and Greg. Really, you have make us feel really good. I've got great confidence in the work you're doing, and we're very, very grateful for it. You're really part of a solution. So this is a wonderful thing. The foundation representing President George W. Bush, who helped end the last Cold War by working closely with allies, we feel certain that the Bushes would have wanted us to do what we can provide right now in terms of information to bring together the world's leading experts and scientists to discuss the realities of this unique global challenge, and maybe to help avoid a new Cold War, a Cold War around viruses and vaccines. We just don't want that to happen. So we're going to look for leadership and help provide expertise and scientific expertise and the boots on the ground to make a difference. With that said, I am very grateful to our great partner, the Bush School of Government at Texas A&M University, the leadership at Texas A&M, but most significantly, Dr. Marty Murphy and the team that he put together, Sir Farrar and Dr. Hatchett and Dr. Swaminathan. Really, we appreciate what you've done. Glenn, thank you for what you're doing now at the Bush School. And Greg, thank you for the leadership you're providing at Texas A&M as they get ready to produce the vaccine that will help to save the world. With that, I say all the best to all of you, as President Bush would say, and let's keep going forward. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for being part of our program.